Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez, and you're listening to episode 13 of our special series, The Dark Record, where we uncover history's eeriest stories, one strange and unsettling case at a time. Tonight's story takes us to the quiet town of Hexham in northern England. In the 1950s, a family there suffered an unimaginable tragedy, the kind of loss that never fades. Yet within a year, something extraordinary happened. Something that has since become one of the most compelling and controversial cases in the study of reincarnation. Two young sisters died in a sudden accident, and not long after, their mother gave birth to twin girls. From the very beginning, the twins displayed signs, behaviors, and even physical marks that tied them to the sisters who had been lost. The next entry into the dark record, the Pollock Twins. Let's begin. To understand the story of the Pollock twins, we have to begin with the tragedy that came before. In the market town of Hexham, in northern England, John and Florence Pollock were raising their two young daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline. The Pollocks were a devout Catholic family, and though life in post-war Britain was modest, their home was filled with the everyday joys of childhood. Joanna, born in 1946, was bright, outgoing, and protective of her younger sister. Jacqueline, born in 1951, was lively but more dependent, often leaning on her older sister for confidence. Together, the girls formed a close bond that their parents cherished. But in May of 1957, that bond was torn apart in a sudden, violent way. On the morning of Sunday, May 5th, the two sisters were walking to church with a family friend when a car struck them at high speed. The driver, a local woman who had recently lost custody of her own children, mounted the curb in a disturbed state of mind. The collision was devastating. 11-year-old Joanna and 6-year-old Jacqueline were killed instantly. Their parents, John and Florence, were left with grief that no parent ever fully recovers from. For John in particular, the loss stirred something deep. He had always been fascinated by spiritual matters, and in his anguish, he began to fixate on the idea of reincarnation. He was convinced, even before the dust of tragedy had settled, that his daughters might return to him in another form. Florence, grounded and practical, resisted the thought. She wanted to heal, to move forward, to raise the children she still hoped to have. But John clung to the belief that Joanna and Jacqueline would somehow come back. Jacqueline, the younger of the two, carried distinctive physical marks that John would later point to as important. As a child, she had fallen and cut her forehead, leaving a faint but visible scar above her right eye. She also bore a birthmark on her waist. For John, these details mattered. If the girls did return, he believed, there would be signs. The months that followed were heavy with mourning. Florence struggled to reconcile her faith with the loss, while John's certainty about reincarnation caused tension in the marriage. He prayed and even begged for a sign that their daughters were not truly gone. A year passed, and then came a pregnancy. Florence discovered she was expecting again, and while she anticipated one new child, John insisted from the beginning that there would be two. His conviction was so strong that when the time came and Florence delivered identical twin girls in October of 1958, he was not surprised. To him, it was the first step in the fulfillment of what he had believed all along, that Joanna and Jacqueline had returned. In October of 1958, Florence Pollock gave birth to twin girls. Their names were Gillian and Jennifer, and though they were identical twins, their parents noticed differences almost immediately. For John Pollock, the birth felt less like chance and more like confirmation of what he had believed since the day his daughters died. To him, Joanna and Jacqueline had returned. From the very beginning, one detail stood out above all others. Jennifer, the younger of the twins, bore two unusual marks on her body. One was a thin line across her forehead, a scar-like mark in the exact spot where Jacqueline had carried her childhood injury. The other was a birthmark on her waist, matching the mark Jacqueline had been born with years earlier. Gillian, her sister, had no such marks. For John, these details were undeniable evidence. He had begged for his daughters to return, and now here was Jennifer, carrying the same physical identifiers that Jacqueline had. Florence was slower to accept this interpretation. She loved her new daughters deeply, but she was wary of reading too much into what might have been coincidence. Identical twins sometimes develop slight differences in features or markings, and she did not want to believe that her children's lives were preordained or haunted by the past. Still, even she could not deny the strange familiarity of those marks. As the girls grew, small signs began to appear. Gillian, the elder twin, often carried herself with a maturity that seemed beyond her years, echoing Joanna's protective nature. Jennifer, by contrast, was more dependent, preferring to follow her sister's lead, just as Jacqueline had once followed Joanna. These traits alone might have been dismissed as the ordinary dynamics between siblings, but in the Pollock household, every small echo was noticed and remembered. The twins were also, in John's mind, an answer to his conviction that Florence would give birth to two children, not one. Doctors had initially believed she was carrying a single baby, but John never wavered. He told friends, neighbors, and even Florence herself that there would be twins, and he was proven correct on the day of their birth. For a man who already leaned toward belief, it was another piece of the puzzle. By the time Gillian and Jennifer were toddlers, John was quietly convinced their identities stretched beyond their birth. He saw in them not just his new daughters, but the return of the two he had lost. Florence resisted the idea, insisting the girls were their own people, not echoes of the dead. But the tension between belief and doubt would only grow as the children began to speak, to play, and to remember things they should not have known.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
As Gillian and Jennifer grew from infants into young children, the Pollocks began to notice more than physical resemblances or personality quirks. The girls began to display behaviors and knowledge that, according to their parents, could not be explained by anything they had experienced in their short lives. For John, these were the moments that turned his quiet conviction into certainty. One of the earliest signs came in the form of toys. After the accident, Florence had packed away the playthings that had once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Years later, when Gillian and Jennifer were old enough to play, the toys were brought out again. To their parents' astonishment, the twins began to name the dolls and items correctly, using the very names their older sisters had given them. One doll had been called Mary, another Susan, and the twins identified them without hesitation. They argued over who had owned which toy, and in every case, their claims matched perfectly with what Joanna and Jacqueline had once insisted. For John and Florence, this went beyond coincidence. Their memories did not stop at toys. The girls began to speak about details of the accident that had claimed their sisters' lives. Once, during play, Jennifer pointed to Gillian's forehead and said, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." Gillian, in turn, spoke of seeing blood coming out of Jennifer's nose. These details, chilling in their specificity, echoed the injuries sustained in the 1957 accident. The Pollocks were unnerved, unsure how their daughters could know such things. There were other behavioral echoes. Joanna, the elder of the lost sisters, had been more confident, often taking responsibility for her younger sibling. Jacqueline, by contrast, had been dependent, struggling with tasks like gripping a pencil properly. Gillian and Jennifer mirrored these traits almost exactly. Gillian often acted like the older, more responsible child, while Jennifer clung more closely and struggled with the same awkward pencil grip that Jacqueline had once displayed. Even their fears seemed to line up with the past. Neither Gillian nor Jennifer had ever witnessed the accident, yet both displayed an unusual fear of cars. When vehicles passed them on the street, the twins would cling to their mother or cry out in distress. For John, this was yet another sign of memory carried over, fear imprinted from a life they should not have been able to recall. The most unsettling of all came when the family visited Hexham. Though the twins had been too young to remember living there, they began to recognize landmarks. They pointed out streets, houses, and even schools that had once been part of Joanna and Jacqueline's lives. According to Florence, they correctly identified the school the sisters had attended, even though Gillian and Jennifer had never set foot in it. To skeptics, these stories could be explained by suggestion, parental influence, or coincidence. But to John Pollock, each moment was another confirmation. His daughters had returned, not only in body, but in memory, carrying fragments of the lives they had lived before. By the early 1960s, the story of Gillian and Jennifer Pollock had reached beyond Hexham. The unusual memories, the physical marks, and the uncanny echoes of Joanna and Jacqueline caught the attention of researchers interested in survival of consciousness and reincarnation. Among them was Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, who would become one of the leading figures in the scientific study of past life memories in children. Stevenson eventually documented over 2,000 such cases around the world, but the Pollock twins would become one of his most famous examples. Stevenson first began looking into the Pollock case in 1963, when Gillian and Jennifer were about 5 years old. He interviewed John and Florence at length, carefully recording their recollections of what the twins had said and done. He was especially interested in the birthmarks that Jennifer carried, the line across her forehead resembling Jacqueline's scar, and the mark on her waist that mirrored Jacqueline's birthmark. Birthmarks and birth defects were of particular interest to Stevenson, because he believed they might represent physical evidence of continuity from one life to another. Stevenson's investigation extended beyond simple interviews. He examined medical records to confirm Jacqueline's scar and birthmark, then compared them to Jennifer's markings. He also checked that Gillian and Jennifer were in fact identical twins through blood tests, which ruled out the possibility that their differences were due to genetic variation. To him, this made the birthmarks even more striking, because identical twins should not differ in that way without some unusual cause. Over the years, Stevenson tracked the twins' development. He noted their recognition of toys, their discussions of the fatal accident, and their apparent familiarity with places they should not have known. He also documented the personality traits, Gillian's maturity, and protectiveness compared with Jennifer's dependence and awkwardness that seemed to mirror Joanna and Jacqueline. What impressed Stevenson most was not just the details themselves, but the consistency of the Pollock's testimony. John and Florence told the same stories over many years, and they insisted they had not encouraged or coached their daughters into speaking about their lost sisters. In fact, Florence admitted that she was uncomfortable with the idea of reincarnation and had discouraged John from dwelling on it. To Stevenson, this made the case stronger. The mother's reluctance suggested that the children's words had not been shaped by eager believers, but had arisen on their own. Stevenson would later write about the Pollock twins in several of his publications, citing their case as one of the most compelling he had encountered. While he stopped short of declaring reincarnation proven, he argued that cases like this could not be dismissed without serious consideration. To him, the combination of physical marks, behavioral echoes, and memory-like statements made the Pollock twins a cornerstone in the study of past life phenomena. As with nearly every case in the dark record, the story of the Pollock twins is not without its skeptics. To believers, Gillian and Jennifer stand as evidence that reincarnation is real, that the memories, behaviors, and even birthmarks of their lost sisters carried over into new bodies. To skeptics, however, the case raises more questions than it answers, and each unusual detail can be explained in ways that do not require crossing the boundaries of life and death. One of the most obvious points of debate concerns memory. Human memory is fragile, malleable, and prone to reshaping over time. Most of the key recollections we have of the twins' behaviors come through the parents, John and Florence, rather than independent witnesses. Critics argue that parents grieving such a tragedy might have unconsciously shaped the narrative, either by interpreting ordinary childhood behavior as extraordinary or by reinforcing certain memories until they took on a life of their own. A child might say something vague about blood or an accident, and in the Pollock household, where the tragedy was never far from mind, those words could easily be tied back to the fatal day in 1957. Another explanation points to suggestion. John Pollock was outspoken in his belief in reincarnation, so much so that it caused tension in his marriage. Skeptics argue that his conviction could have influenced the way he interpreted the twins' behavior and the way he spoke to them. Even subtle cues from a parent can shape a child's responses. If John hinted that a toy had belonged to Joanna or Jacqueline, for instance, the twins might have repeated the idea until it seemed like their own memory. Florence resisted this interpretation, insisting she tried to suppress talk of reincarnation, but critics maintain that John's belief loomed large enough to leave an imprint on the household. The birthmarks and scars that so impressed Dr. Stevenson are also debated. While unusual, birthmarks are common, and skeptics point out that coincidence cannot be ruled out. Identical twins, though genetically matched, can show differences in markings due to random developmental factors in the womb. To a grieving father convinced of reincarnation, even ordinary differences could take on extraordinary meaning. Psychologists have also raised the idea of familial influence. Children naturally pick up details from conversations, even when adults believe they are not listening. Gillian and Jennifer could have absorbed information about their deceased sisters from overheard remarks, then repeated it in play. What sounded like past life memory may have been nothing more than normal childhood mimicry. Despite these counter-arguments, defenders of the case insist the specifics are too striking to dismiss. Jennifer's matching scar and birthmark, the precise toy identifications, and the spontaneous references to the accident all pile up in ways that skeptics struggle to explain as mere chance. For every rational explanation, there remains a lingering unease, the sense that something more might be at work. And that tension between belief and doubt is why the Pollock twins continue to fascinate. To skeptics, they are a lesson in memory, suggestion, and the human need for meaning in tragedy. To believers, they are proof that death is not the end, that the past can echo into the present through the lives of children who should have had no way of remembering. More than half a century after the events in Hexham, the story of the Pollock twins remains one of the most enduring and debated cases in reincarnation research. For Dr. Ian Stevenson, it became a cornerstone example in his extensive catalog of children's past life memories. He often cited it because it combined three strands of evidence he considered most significant: physical marks, behavioral traits, and verbal memories. Few other cases brought those threads together so neatly, and for that reason, the Pollock twins continue to be referenced in nearly every serious discussion of reincarnation. The case also seeped into popular culture. Articles, books, and documentaries on the paranormal frequently revisit the Pollocks, holding up Gillian and Jennifer as examples of life beyond death. For believers, their story is reassuring, a suggestion that loved ones lost too soon may not be gone forever, but could return in new forms. For skeptics, the case is equally compelling, not because it proves reincarnation, but because it demonstrates how powerful memory, belief, and grief can be in shaping the way we interpret childhood behavior. In that way, the Pollock twins have become a mirror, reflecting back what people already believe about life, death, and the possibility of what lies beyond. But what about the twins themselves? As they grew older, the memories that had once so unsettled their parents began to fade. By the age of 7 or 8, the girls no longer spoke of Joanna and Jacqueline with the same conviction. Their fascination with the old toys diminished, their recognition of Hexham landmarks dulled, and their fears became more ordinary. This fading of memory is common in Stevenson's research. Many children with alleged past life recall lose the memories as they grow into adolescence. As adults, both Gillian and Jennifer went on to live relatively normal lives. They did not continue to display memories of their deceased sisters, nor did they pursue the notoriety of their case. In later years, Gillian reported occasional flash-like images that seemed connected to Joanna's life, scenes, and places she should not have recognized. But these were fleeting, never as vivid as her childhood experiences. Jennifer did not report anything similar. For the most part, they lived privately, aware of the interest their case generated, but not seeking the spotlight. Today, Gillian and Jennifer are still alive, ordinary women who grew up under the shadow of an extraordinary claim. The fact that they settled into normal adult lives adds an almost haunting quality to the case. Two children who may, or may not, have carried echoes of lives cut short, only to grow into adults with those memories locked away in the past. Whether one views the Pollock twins as compelling evidence of reincarnation or as a family story magnified by grief, the case continues to provoke debate. It lingers because it touches on questions that science has yet to answer. Where do memories come from? Can identity survive death? And how do we reconcile the unexplainable with the ordinary? For me, the Pollock twins are unsettling not because they prove reincarnation, but because they challenge the way we think about memory, identity, and the boundaries of life itself. Whether the story is read as evidence of a mystery beyond death, or as an example of how human belief shapes perception, it endures as one of the strangest and most haunting cases of the 20th century. That brings us to the end of episode 13 of The Dark Record. We've traced the Pollock family's journey from loss and tragedy to one of the strangest cases ever documented in the study of reincarnation. Two sisters gone too soon, two twins born a year later, and a childhood filled with memories and marks that seemed to reach across lives. Remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we'll move from northern England to the windswept county of Devon, where in the winter of 1855, villagers awoke to find strange hoof-like tracks pressed into the snow. They stretched for miles across rooftops, rivers, and fields, and no one could say what left them behind. We'll explore the Devil's Footprints of Devon. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or at our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, stay curious. And remember, some secrets are buried too deep to be unearthed. Have a good night.